At 4:12 local time in the Strait of Hormuz, the Combat Information Center aboard the escorting destroyer is quiet but tense. The sonar operator leans slightly toward the screen, his eyes fixed on the acoustic display. At first, there is nothing unusual, only the constant background noise of shallow water, merchant vessels, distant engines, and the deep vibration of tankers moving through the narrow Gulf shipping lanes. Then a new sound appears. It is faint, low frequency, slow moving, bearing 142. The operator listens again through his headset. The pattern is too steady to ignore. Heavy propeller blades, even spacing, controlled movement. This is not a merchant vessel. It is not surface traffic. It is coming from beneath the water. Con, sonar, possible submerged contact bearing 142. The officer of the deck does not answer right away. In the Strait of Hormuz, false contacts are common. The water is shallow, crowded, and acoustically chaotic. But then the display changes again. A second signature appears, bearing 155 with an almost identical acoustic profile. Another submerged contact. This one is moving slowly toward the carrier strike group. The operator's voice becomes tighter. Con, sonar, second contact confirmed. Subsurface bearing 155. Inside the CIC, several officers turn toward the sonar station. Two contacts, both diesel-electric signatures, both approaching the same area. At the center of that area is the aircraft carrier. Before anyone can fully process it, a third signature appears, bearing 168. Another propeller pattern, another submerged engine. Three separate acoustic tracks from three different directions, all moving toward the formation. The room grows noticeably quieter. Con, sonar. We now have three possible submarines. For a moment, the words seem to hang in the air. Three submarines inside one of the most sensitive choke points in the Persian Gulf, a passage less than 40 miles wide at its narrowest point. The officer of the deck turns immediately toward the tactical display. Range? The sonar operator checks the data again. Estimated 11 nautical miles, closing slowly. Speed 4 knots. 4 knots is not transit speed. 4 knots is approach speed, slow enough to stay quiet but fast enough to move into position. Inside the CIC, the acoustic analysts begin working fast. Blade count, propeller rhythm, engine harmonics. Every submarine leaves its own signature in the water, like a fingerprint made of sound. Within seconds, a classification begins to form. Diesel electric propulsion, large propeller diameter, heavy hull displacement. One analyst leans closer to the screen. Possible kilo class profile. Another technician checks the second track. The third is smaller, could match a Fateh class signature. Iranian submarines are operating inside the strait, already within a range that cannot be ignored. At 4:14, the tactical display updates again. Three red symbols appear beneath the surface layer of the map, each one moving slowly closer to the strike group. The aircraft carrier continues at steady speed through the shipping lane, protected by destroyers and cruisers spread around it. Above the surface, everything looks routine. Tankers move through traffic separation lanes. Morning light reflects off the calm waters of the Gulf. Nothing appears unusual. But below the surface, the shape of a coordinated engagement is beginning to form. Three submarines, three approach angles, one carrier at the center. The sonar operator listens again. For a moment, one propeller signature fades, then returns. One of the submarines has altered course. Its bearing shifts by 5 degrees, now pointing closer to the carrier's projected path. The tactical officer speaks quietly into the internal communications line. Bridge CIC, possible triple submarine contact. Recommend anti-submarine posture. On the carrier's bridge, the captain receives the report without interruption. 3 submarines, inside 11 nautical miles, converging. There is no panic, no raised voice, only a short reply. Very well. A brief pause follows. Then comes the order that changes the posture of the entire formation. Set condition 3. The response begins immediately. Anti-submarine watches activate across multiple ships. Sonar systems shift to active standby. Helicopter crews begin starting engines on the flight decks. Destroyers subtly adjust their spacing around the carrier. The formation tightens, but beneath the surface, the submarines keep moving. Slow, quiet, patient. At 4:17, the sonar operator hears it first. A sudden metallic pulse travels through the water, followed by the sharp rise of a high-speed propeller signature. The acoustic spectrum spikes. The operator looks up. Then another launch signature appears. And another. 3 separate acoustic tracks from 3 different bearings, all accelerating rapidly. His voice cuts across the CIC. Torpedo in the water. A second later, he corrects himself. Multiple torpedoes. 3, correction, 4, high speed. On the tactical display, the new contacts appear like arrows racing through the sea. They are moving far faster than any submarine, directly toward the carrier strike group. 3 Iranian submarines have just launched. Somewhere in the dark water beneath the Strait of Hormuz, a critical countdown has begun. At 4:18 local time, the call echoes through the Combat Information Center. Torpedo in the water! For a fraction of a second, the room goes still. Then training takes control. Every screen in the CIC shifts into tracking mode. Sonar returns flood the displays as the incoming contacts cut through the narrow waters of the strait. The sonar operator locks onto the first track. High-speed propeller signature, heavy cavitation. Moving fast. Bearing 153. Speed increasing. Sonar. Contact 1 confirmed. Range 8,000 yards. Closing fast. Another operator locks onto the second incoming track. Second contact bearing 166. Similar profile. Then the third appears. Then the fourth. The acoustic picture sharpens. 4 high-speed underwater contacts have entered the water almost at the same moment, coming from 3 separate directions. Inside the CIC, the tactical officer studies the display for barely 2 seconds before the pattern becomes obvious. A coordinated 3-angle engagement. The submarines did not launch at random. Each one used a different vector, creating a wide triangular trap around the carrier's projected course. The plan is simple. Force the carrier to turn away from one threat, only to move closer to another. Old submarine tactics. Extremely dangerous when timed correctly. On the bridge of the aircraft carrier, the captain receives the update. 4 inbound contacts. Multiple bearings. His decision comes immediately. Helm. Hard port. 20 degrees. The enormous carrier begins to turn. But a vessel weighing around 100,000 tons does not change direction quickly. Even with its reactors driving full power through 4 shafts, its momentum is massive. The ship starts a slow, powerful arc through the water. Deep below decks, engineering increases shaft output. On the flight deck, sailors brace as the carrier begins to lean into the turn. But the carrier cannot outrun what is coming. That is why the escorts are there. At 4:19, 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers surge forward from their screening positions, USS Mason and USS Gravely. Their mission changes instantly. Shield the carrier, draw off the incoming contacts, find the submarines. Deploy Nixie! The command moves across both destroyers almost at the same time. Moments later, the AN/SLQ-25 Nixie decoy systems are released into the water behind each ship. A long cable streams into the sea, towing a small torpedo-shaped acoustic device through the water. Within seconds, it begins projecting a powerful artificial signature, louder and more tempting than the ship itself. Its purpose is simple: convince the incoming systems to chase the decoy instead of the real target. Inside the CIC, the tracks keep closing. Range 6,000 yards, speed 50 knots. The water around the strike group becomes a storm of sound. Destroyers maneuver hard. Decoys transmit. Active sonar pulses begin pushing outward through the strait. Above the formation, the first helicopter rises from the deck. An MH-60R Seahawk lifts off from one of the destroyers, rotors hammering the air as it accelerates low over the water. Seconds later, a second Seahawk launches from another ship. Their crews already know the task: find the submarines, because the moment a submarine launches, it leaves clues behind. At 4:20, the tactical picture tightens again. The first incoming contact suddenly changes course. Its seeker has taken the bait, locking onto the Nixie decoy trailing behind one of the destroyers. Contact 1 diverting. On the display, the track bends away from the carrier. The decoy is working. Seconds later, the second contact shifts as well. The artificial signature is louder, closer, and easier to follow than the fading acoustic trace of the carrier. But the third contact does not turn. It stays locked on the original target. Contact 3 still tracking the carrier. Range under 4,000 yards. Inside the CIC, the tension rises. At 50 knots, that distance disappears fast. Then the fourth contact begins adjusting course. Not toward the decoy, but toward the carrier's new heading. The submarine crews had expected the carrier to maneuver. Their systems were prepared for it. Now 2 incoming contacts are still following the carrier. The strike group moves with controlled urgency. Destroyers cut across the carrier's wake. Helicopters race toward the launch bearings. Active sonar pulses roll through the water and across the seabed like distant thunder. Searching, listening, closing in. At 4:21, one of the helicopters receives the first solid return. A strong echo. Large submerged hull. Depth roughly 400 feet. Bearing matches one of the launch vectors. The pilot banks hard. Contact confirmed. The hunter has found its target. But behind them, deep beneath the carrier strike group, the incoming contacts are still closing. Range 2,000 yards, estimated time remaining under 2 minutes. At 4:21 local time, above the carrier strike group, the first MH-60R Seahawk turns sharply toward the contact. The helicopter flies low, barely 200 feet above the water. Its rotor wash tears pale streaks across the calm surface of the strait as it races toward the suspected submarine position. Inside the cabin, the sensor operator watches the tactical feed coming from the destroyer below. One large submerged contact, estimated depth 400 feet, speed minimal, trying to vanish. But after launching, a submarine cannot simply erase itself from the water. The Seahawk crew moves immediately. Prepare sonobuoys. The rear door slides open. Seconds later, the first cylindrical buoy drops into the sea. Then another, then another. Within moments, a chain of acoustic sensors spreads across the water like an invisible listening net. Each buoy deploys a hydrophone deep beneath the surface, sending real-time audio back to the helicopter. The operator adjusts his headset. Suddenly, the ocean is full of sound. Propeller wash, hydraulic noise, the distant roar of fast underwater engines, and beneath all of it, low and steady, the mechanical rhythm of a submarine trying to stay hidden. Contact acquired, bearing 164. The helicopter widens its circle and releases more sonobuoys into the water. One after another, sensors drop into the strait, spreading across the suspected area like an invisible net. In less than 2 minutes, dozens of acoustic feeds begin streaming into the strike group's combat network. The quiet seafloor of the Strait of Hormuz is no longer just a shipping corridor. It has become the center of a high-stakes underwater pursuit. At 4:22, near the carrier, the incoming contact picture changes again. Two of the fast-moving tracks suddenly turn away. Their seekers have locked onto the destroyer's decoys, following the louder artificial signatures being pulled through the water. The first contact passes behind the escort ship and continues away from the formation. Seconds later, it is no longer a threat. Inside the CIC, one symbol disappears from the screen. Contact 1 neutralized, but the situation is not over. Another contact begins circling near the decoy field, confused and searching. The fourth remains focused on the carrier's propulsion signature. Range 1,500 yards. On the carrier's bridge, the captain gives the next command. Rudder hard starboard. The massive ship begins another turn, changing course to make the targeting solution harder to hold. Below the surface, the seeker tries to reacquire the carrier's new path. But the underwater environment has become chaotic. Ships maneuvering, decoys broadcasting false signatures, sonar pulses echoing off the seabed. For a split second, the incoming system hesitates. That is all the escorts need. The Nixie decoy drifts across its path, broadcasting a stronger acoustic signal than the carrier itself. The contact locks onto the false target and turns away. Moments later, a distant underwater blast confirms it. The final inbound threat is gone, but the operation is not finished, because the submarines that launched them are still somewhere beneath the strait. At 4:23, the Seahawk tightens its orbit above the sonobuoy grid. Inside the cabin, the sensor operator watches the pattern develop across his screen. 3 submerged contacts are now visible. One is moving south, trying to withdraw. Another has slowed almost completely. The third is diving deeper, likely attempting to hide beneath a thermal layer where sound becomes harder to track. The operator speaks calmly over the intercom. Primary contact confirmed. Kilo-class profile. Depth 420 feet. The pilot glances at the targeting display. Ready? Ready. The helicopter steadies over the target area. From above, the water looks peaceful. No wake, no shadow, no sign of the large steel vessel moving hundreds of feet below. Then the Seahawk's weapons officer releases the Mark 54. It drops cleanly from the aircraft and hits the surface with a sharp splash, vanishing beneath the waves almost instantly. For one brief moment, the water is still. Then the engine activates. A stream of bubbles marks its path as it drives downward, guided by the helicopter's sensor network. Inside the Seahawk, the operator keeps his eyes locked on the display. 2 symbols move across the screen. One submarine, one intercepting track. The distance between them is shrinking fast. Below the surface, the submarine crew realizes the situation has changed. Their surprise approach has turned into exposure. They begin an emergency maneuver, adjusting ballast and diving deeper toward the complex terrain near the seabed. But the Mark 54 is already correcting its course. It follows the turn. It closes the gap. At 4:24, a powerful underwater shockwave rolls through the strait. The surface lifts briefly above the contact point, then settles back into calm water. On the Seahawk's display, the submarine signature disappears. 1 contact is gone, 2 remain, and the helicopters are already searching for them. At 4:24 local time, the surface above the carrier strike group appears calm again. But inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical display shows the truth. 1 submerged contact has vanished. 2 are still moving. Both are attempting to retreat deeper into the strait. But now the strike group has their positions. What the Iranian crews never understood was that their movements had been under observation long before the first weapon ever left a launch tube. 12 hours earlier, well before the carrier strike group entered the narrowest part of the Strait of Hormuz, a Boeing P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft had flown a quiet surveillance pattern across the region. Officially, the mission looked routine. But during that flight, the Poseidon released more than 100 sonobuoys across a wide grid covering nearly 70 square miles. Each buoy carried a sensitive hydrophone built to detect even the faintest mechanical sounds beneath the surface. Propeller movement, hull vibration, engine harmonics. A single buoy can only listen to a small section of water, but together they create a wide underwater detection network, a silent listening system already waiting beneath the busy shipping lanes. So when the Iranian submarines slipped into the strait earlier that night, the Navy had already heard them. Their entry bearings, their speed, their slow adjustments toward the projected path of the strike group. At first, the submarines kept strict discipline. Low speed, minimal noise, careful movement near the seabed, classic diesel-electric infiltration tactics. But the sonobuoy grid had already captured their acoustic fingerprints. Analysts aboard the P-8A and the destroyers receiving the data could see the pattern forming hours before the confrontation began. 3 submarines moving into a triangular approach, each one positioning itself along a different vector. The shape was impossible to miss. An ambush was taking form, but instead of changing course immediately, the strike group continued its planned transit. The carrier moved forward. The escorts held formation. On the surface, nothing appeared different. But beneath that calm exterior, the Navy was already preparing for what might come next. Additional helicopters were placed on standby. Destroyers tightened their protective screen. Sonar operators began watching the buoy network with even greater focus. They watched the submarines move slowly into launch range. They watched the pattern develop, and when the underwater weapons finally entered the water, the strike group was already ready to respond. Now back in the present moment, the trap is closing. At 4:25, the second Seahawk helicopter arrives above the sonobuoy field. Its crew immediately begins searching the acoustic grid for the remaining submerged contacts. The sensor operator studies the display carefully. One contact is moving south, increasing speed and attempting to break away. The other has slowed sharply, possibly trying to settle near the seabed, where sonar reflections become harder to read. But the buoy network already has their bearings. Contact 2 confirmed, the operator says. Depth, 450 feet. The pilot banks the helicopter hard toward the position. Below the aircraft, the water looks perfectly calm. But 400 feet down, a submarine is moving through the dark as fast as it can. Inside that submarine, the crew now understands the situation. Their strike failed. American helicopters are already above them. The captain orders a deeper dive. Ballast tanks flood, and the submarine descends toward the colder, denser water near the bottom of the strait. The crew is trying to use seabed clutter to make tracking more difficult, but the helicopter already has a firing solution. Weapon ready, the sensor operator confirms. The Seahawk steadies over the target zone. Then the second Mark 54 is released. The torpedo drops cleanly into the sea. For a moment, it sinks in silence. Then its engine activates. A hard plume of bubbles marks its acceleration as it begins searching for the target. Inside the helicopter, the operator watches both symbols on the screen. The submarine, the incoming weapon. The distance between them is shrinking quickly. Deep below, the Iranian submarine makes a desperate maneuver. A sharp turn, more speed. An attempt to break away from the seeker. But modern torpedoes do not simply chase, they listen, they correct, they adapt. The Mark 54 curves through the water column, reacquires the submarine's acoustic signature, and continues closing. At 4:26, a deep underwater concussion rolls through the strait. The Seahawk's sensors register the shock wave instantly. The submarine contact disappears from the tactical display. A rising column of bubbles marks the point far below. 2 submarines are now gone from the fight. But somewhere within the complex underwater terrain of the Strait of Hormuz, one Iranian submarine is still moving, and every sonobuoy in the network is listening for it. At 4:27 local time, inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical display begins to stabilize again. Only moments earlier, the screen had been filled with movement. Incoming tracks, sonar pulses, evasive maneuvers, and helicopters crossing the grid above the strait. Now, 2 of the red submarine symbols have vanished. Confirmed, neutralized. One contact remains, bearing 187, depth unknown, speed increasing. The third Iranian submarine is running. The sonar operator adjusts the gain in his headset and listens carefully. At first, the sound is faint, little more than a distant mechanical hum far beneath the water. Then, the signal becomes clearer. Propeller cavitation, higher RPM. The submarine captain has pushed the boat to greater speed. Moving faster means making more noise, but staying slow means there may be no way out. The Iranian crew has chosen escape. Above the surface, the Seahawk helicopters widen their search pattern. The first aircraft moves west, dropping additional sonobuoys to stretch the acoustic grid farther into the strait. The second Seahawk remains near the last confirmed position, circling and listening for movement beneath the thermocline layer. Within minutes, the detection network expands again. Dozens of sensors are now listening through the water column. Every hydrophone feeds live data back to the destroyers. Every faint mechanical sound is captured, measured, and compared. At 4:29, the destroyer's sonar team regains a stronger track. Con, sonar, possible submarine bearing 189. Range, 4 nautical miles. The contact is deeper now, likely staying close to the uneven seabed where underwater ridges can scatter sonar returns. The submarine is trying to use the terrain as cover, but the Strait of Hormuz is not a deep ocean hiding place. Its shallow water makes concealment difficult. Every maneuver disturbs the water. Every change in propeller speed leaves a trace. Every movement adds another clue. And the Navy is listening from every direction. The tactical officer studies the display for several seconds. The submarine is moving south, toward the narrow channel leading deeper into the Persian Gulf. If it reaches the dense commercial traffic lanes, tracking it will become much harder. Tankers, cargo ships, and hundreds of engines will create a wall of background noise. The submarine captain is trying to disappear inside that noise. The nearest Seahawk begins moving at once. Vector to contact, the pilot says calmly. The aircraft banks south and accelerates low across the water. Inside the cabin, the sensor operator watches the tracking data refresh. The submarine increases speed again, 6 knots, then 8. Too fast to remain quiet, but fast enough to push toward the edge of the sensor grid. The weapons officer prepares another Mark 54, but aboard the destroyer, the tactical officer pauses. The submarine is still inside the surveillance network, still being tracked, still visible. Engaging it now would be possible, but allowing it to keep moving could reveal something more valuable. Where it goes, where it reports, and where its support network may be waiting. The decision moves quickly through the strike group. Maintain tracking, no weapon release, not yet. At 4:31, the submarine continues south. Its propeller noise slowly fades as the distance grows, but the sonobuoy network keeps following the contact. Bearing updates arrive every few seconds. Every course change is logged, every speed increase is recorded. The Iranian crew believes they are slipping away. In reality, they are still being watched. Above the strait, the Seahawk helicopters widen their patrol pattern. One aircraft climbs slightly, scanning the horizon for additional surface contacts. The other stays low, orbiting along the submarine's projected route. Below them, the carrier strike group reforms its protective screen. Destroyers return to their escort positions. Cruisers stabilize their radar coverage. The aircraft carrier resumes steady movement through the strait. No damage, no visible disruption. The entire underwater engagement has lasted less than 15 minutes. Inside the CIC, the final submarine contact grows weaker as it reaches the southern edge of the sensor grid. Eventually, its acoustic trace blends into the distant noise of tanker traffic. The operator slowly removes his headset. Contact lost. But the data is not lost. Every sonar recording, every launch detection, every maneuver, every change in speed has been stored, analyzed, and cataloged. Above the calm surface of the Strait of Hormuz, nothing appears out of place. Merchant ships continue their slow passage between the Persian Gulf and the open ocean. Sunlight glints across the water. The carrier strike group moves steadily onward, but beneath the surface, the evidence of the brief underwater confrontation remains. 2 submarines left silent on the seabed, one escape route tracked heading south, and a message delivered without a single missile leaving the sky. In the narrow waters of Hormuz, every movement is heard, every signal is recorded, every captain beneath the surface understands the same truth. The ocean can hide you for a while, but the U.S. Navy is always listening.